My name is Dave Puls, and in 1973, at the age of 21, I went to work at the Rochester State Hospital. After 3 weeks of training, I was placed on one of the back wards as a mental hygiene therapist aide. For a few months, I worked on the semi-civilized day shift with nurses, a part-time social worker, and on one morning a week, a recreational therapist. We would also see a doctor briefly each week to prescribe medications for the patients. Because there were limited drugs available at the time, the state of New York provided its severely mentally ill patients with all the loose tobacco they could roll and smoke. We regularly handed out bags of red cheap tobacco, the worst smelling tobacco ever. In the winter months, the ward would become one thick cloud of smoke. Loose tobacco and cigarette butts were everywhere on the floor, in the chairs and covering the ping pong table, a favorite rolling spot. In those days, the patients had to clean their own wards. A lot of the therapy for patients revolved around sweeping and mopping the long hallways, expansive dorms, and worst of all, cleaning the bathrooms. On the day shift, some of us therapists would actually do some of the work with the patients. After a short time, I was rotated onto the evening shift. On evenings, manual labor by staff was against the employees' unwritten rules, and I was told in no uncertain terms not to do any of the work with the patients. Somehow, it was thought of as being beneath them, and that it weakened the staff control and the hierarchy of the patient-staff relations. I actually enjoyed being active, and continued to sweep and mop with the patients. This did not go over well. I didn't like working on the evening shift. The atmosphere seemed even further back in the dark ages than the day shift. One evening, an employee, who I knew vaguely from high school, was arguing with a patient over the TV channel that was going to be on. There were a number of patients who were watching the channel that the other patient wanted, but they knew their place and said nothing. The problematic patient was ordered to go to bed, but refused. As I walked into the day room, the employee had the patient pinned to the floor with his fist raised back to strike. I called out the employee's first name and grabbed his arm as it was coming down. His fist didn't make contact, but the impact of one employee holding back another staff member reverberated through that whole hospital that night. The supervising aide, with 40 years of experience, told me, quote, "Don't ever interfere like that again. Someday you may need our help," and walked away. The next evening, I was told that I was being put back on days where the hospital could supervise me more closely. It appears that the evening supervisor, who had offered his harsh advice, refused to work with me and said that all I did all evening was play my guitar. He was correct, I played my guitar, but it was always with the patients, and it was always after we had swept and mopped the whole ward. He gave a scathing report about me, and he recommended that my probation period be extended. Needless to say, I was glad to be back on days. I spoke to the very caring head nurse of our ward about what had happened. She then reported this to the supervisor of the whole unit. She came back to me and said I was welcome to make a report about the incident, but she also wanted to let me know that this same employee had been reported for 5 other incidents, some of them much worse than what I had seen. In each instance, the reporting employee had left and the problem employee remained. It appears that the hospital actually saw the reporting employee as the one creating the dilemma. Besides, they were usually the newer employee, and they wouldn't be able to hack it in such a high-stress job anyway. It took employees with a tougher temperament to survive. Some of my co-workers had been M.P.s in Vietnam, and had only recently returned. They never really fired the reporting employee. It just became so uncomfortable for them to work there that they voluntarily handed in their resignations. I resigned after 2 years. It is now 30 years later, and my memories are shaken by the photographs from the Iraqi prisons. I am tearful that I was unable to affect a brutal situation as a young person, and I only hope that these photos will shake us all to find more adequate safeguards. It absolutely can change. It requires that our leaders be diligent in their supervision. Basic human decency should be one of our highest priorities, and it can no longer be the excuse of those responsible to say, "Gee, we never knew a thing about it." Well, they had better find out. It is their responsibility to have people under them that understand that they must report to their supervisors when these abuses occur. For our leaders to expect this to work, they will have to adamantly reinforce this concept down the whole chain of command, or they will be responsible for its failure. Hopefully, America and the world will use the abuses that we have witnessed in Iraq as the catalyst to hold our leaders more accountable. We've got the tougher stance to uphold, but that's exactly why it's so important not to let our fears overcome our decency. If we become like the terrorists, they've won.